So Amelia, I think that perhaps we should start by just saying how we know each other.
Oh,
I'll start by saying, so in this mentor to mentor talk, you have become quite a mentor to me in that you're so open and forthright around issues of race, and you don't tiptoe around it. And I consider you someone that I can go to and have a real conversation with. So when Tatia from Upnotch reached out and said, we do these mentor to mentor talks and we like to kind of get people who have good chemistry, who already kind of know each other. I was like, it was like, bam, you just flashed into my mind. So here we are. And we've also talked about, starting a
I love
podcast
it.
at some point. So today we get to
Yes.
be frank and open about some of the conversations we've had. And really, I think we're probably going to get into some conversations we haven't had because this is unscripted, truly, right? We've talked about a few of the questions we want to ask, but we really have not discussed where this will go. So this should be
That's
kind
right.
of, yeah.
This should be very cool. And I'm so glad you reached out because I too think of you as someone who says the quiet part out loud, which I like to do. And I like people who do that, who push it and say the thing that needs to be said. And so I do remember first meeting you and thinking, remember I told you the story, you were on this panel and the panel was horrible except for you. And I stayed through this wretched panel and only to hear your voice. And I kept hoping the person would come back to you because to ask you questions because your answers were just a breath of fresh air that I thought the audience really needed to hear. So mutual respect here, sister, mutual.
Oh, thanks. Okay, so let's get right into this. I know these are short segments. So one of the things I think would be kind of interesting for folks to hear, kind of like get in the fishbowl, right? Like we're in the fishbowl, let them hear what we where we go in some of our conversations, right? And you said something to me a few months ago, right after George Floyd died, that really intrigued me. You were talking about sitting around the Thanksgiving dinner table or any dinner table with your family, with all of your relatives. And you said something to the effect of, oh man, like what we say when white people aren't around, or actually what you said was, I have a white sister-in-law, and when she came into the family, don't you think we're going to change what we talk about? So given everything that's going on in the world and how many conversations of race are happening, can you tell me what it does sound like when white people aren't around, or maybe when the one white person in your family is around?
Right. Well, a couple of things. One, the conversations, I mean, it's not like we spend all our time at Thanksgiving dinner or holiday dinner, just talking about race. That said, it is a place and a time to relax and to, not have to be on and to have real dialogues about the challenges that you might be going through, about your successes, about all those things. And so the conversation is really wild and varying and not monolithic at all. It isn't as if somebody says, okay, we all believe this thing about race, right? Yep, 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 yep. Okay, great, pass the gravy. There's right? Like any family, there are differences and there are topics that are recurring. It is just a very deep conversation. I would say this. One of the things that doesn't happen is we don't code switch, right? So if you're not familiar with code switching is this notion that people of color and women even show up and maybe converse in a different way or put a different shield on and then take that shield off when they're really comfortable, right? When they can be their authentic self. And so we don't code switch. Like
Right.
we're who we are, and we don't think about having to be present in a way in which Blackness, in my case, since I'm Black, that Blackness might be questioned.
Right.
Right.
You let your guard down. It sounds like you
Totally
let
let the guard down. Yeah.
And so for folks who don't know what code switching is, or who don't have a sense of the guard that goes up, the kind of suit of armor, I've heard it called at times, that you walk into a workplace with if you're on the margins or different or the only one something, right? Is what are some of the examples of how you code switch, or how you have? I mean, I know you've been on obviously a long journey of authenticity, right? And you probably code switch, I would guess, a little less now than you did 20 years ago.
For sure.
That said, for the educational value for all of us white people who don't do that, who don't feel like we need to, what does it look like? What do you switch up?
Sometimes it looks like over explaining a situation or giving more or less context sometimes. So you might say, oh, I have, oh, my sister's having a baby. You might, in a situation, a professional situation, make sure to mention that your sister is married or she is partnered so that the white people do not make an assumption that, oh, Black single mother. There's nothing wrong with Black single mothers, by the way.
Of course.
Said, you might make sure to mention that your sister and her husband are expecting a child.
Wow.
It's just thinking about it like, oh, my sister's having a baby and I'm going to go to a shower or I'm going to do whatever the thing is. Because you know that sometimes the notion, what people's assumption is. I was just in a meeting where someone did this and they were like, oh, when they found out this particular employee's sister-in-law, I can't remember. She says, oh, she's married. And I was like, okay, why did you make the assumption she wasn't married?
Right.
Again, there's nothing wrong with every choice you make in your life. It's just that we put a stigma on those choices for some people. They're empowering for white women. White women who decide to have children all by themselves are empowered.
Yeah.
Black women who have children all by themselves are downtrodden and can't find a man and are a statistic.
Wow.
So that's an example of where you might ensure that you made mention of the holistic view so you could give a holistic view.
Yeah.
Rather than not.
Yeah. This makes me think about, after George Floyd died, I keep mentioning George Floyd because it was such a wake-up call for me and for so many. It really was the moment I can identify as the pivot. And I mean, you know me, I've cared about issues of diversity and inclusion and equity for a long time. That part is not new. My hunger to learn more specifically about Black men and women and their experience in the workplace drove me to reach out to a number of Black friends, colleagues, other professionals, and some folks I didn't even know, and ask these questions around what is your experience of race and racism throughout your career. And one of the things I've heard repeatedly, because one of the questions reminds me of what you're saying, which is I asked the question, how often do you think about race at work? And I give them like 5 choices. Let me see if I can remember them. Never, sometimes, often, daily. I think it's 4 choices. And every single person I've spoken to so far has said daily, which in and of itself was
hourly. Moment by moment.
The code switching piece, I can't believe. I've been just consuming all I can read. I haven't heard that example yet. It's like the examples are everywhere, absolutely everywhere. How you talk about your personal life, how you talk about your work, how you might even alter your speech, or it's. I think
that's how racism is set up. It's set up to have you thinking about it all the time. It's a tape that is going in your head all the time. There's never a time it's not. And I know white people will hear this and think, oh, you're thinking of ways to insert race where it's not inserted. That simply isn't the case. I don't know anybody. I've been Black a very long time and I haven't missed a day yet. Nobody is out there like, how can I make this about race? Said right. No person of color really ever.
That's right.
De minimis. So this notion that it's always there is because it's there. So this is what racism does. Racism says it is illogical. When people tell me, how do I know it's racism? Because racism doesn't make any sense. It follows no line of logic except power. So it says, oh, you live in this neighborhood. Why do you live in neighborhoods like that? And I wouldn't want to live like that. Okay. It says, pull yourself up by your bootstrap. Okay. Then you find yourself accepted at an elite university. Then racism says, how did you get here? Whose spot are you taking? Racism says, you shouldn't live in, quote, the ghetto. Then you move to a nice neighborhood and racism says, why do you live here? I don't want you living next to me.
Yep.
You can't win.
Yep.
Right? There's no winning the racism game. There's class associated with racism, sure. and class says, can you out earn? Can you educate yourself out? Can you do that? Sure, but you can't ever do that with racism. There is no point in life that racism will not rear its head there. And so when you say, is it a daily proposition? It is a daily proposition that you are considering, thinking, wondering, figuring out how to navigate the system, how to hack the system, so that you can succeed. I'm also going to go back and I'm going to make this point, and I know what you mean, but George Floyd didn't die. George Floyd was murdered.
Yes, 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 absolutely.
He was murdered.
Yeah.
And I think I don't ever want to, and I just never want to normalize what happened to him and what has happened to so many other Black bodies at the hands of police and at the hands of people who didn't need to kill them.
Yeah.
Like, he didn't need to be murdered.
That's right. And thank you for that catch, because it's true. And it's important to use specific language, right? Mm-hmm. So thanks for calling that out. I found myself using every word from died to murdered to lynched, right? And, and noticing different responses, to the words. And you're right. It needs to be specific. It was murder. It wasn't death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know.
Yeah.
Do white people talk about race with other white people?
Well, yes and no. So I've been intentionally bringing up conversations of race, and like you, there is no one way that white people talk about race, right? So I think what both of us are sort of pointing out is that, look, all Black people don't feel the same or have the same conversations about race. Neither do all white people. Right. But I can tell you that some of the conversations that I've been in that have been everything from heartening and inspiring to just devastating, and I'll give you the gamut, is, for example, in those interviews that I've been doing, I heard exactly what you just said, Amelia, from everyone I've spoken to so far, which is basically, we look so hard for this to be anything else besides race before we call it race. And so I'm going to start with the extreme over here of what feels really hard, devastating, very difficult to hear, is that I had someone recently say to me, a white person, if we would just stop talking about race, racism would not be such a big deal. It would go away, right? Which made no sense.
But and the thing is, what has that ever been true for?
No, exactly.
This, and give me one example where that's ever been true. Let's not talk about cancer and see if cancer just disappears.
Yeah, exactly. Let's not talk about marital issues and see how well our marriage goes, right?
It has never been true for anything, but we would like it to be true about a structural and systemic, deep-rooted issue that we have. We would suddenly like for it to be true.
Yes. And I mean, I think that for the first time in my life, and I just turned 50 this year, for the first time in my life, as I think more about this question, not only am I having conversations with white people about race, but I think I'm having conversations with every white person I know about race now that I think about it, because there is the responses over there, but more typically, it's more of oh, I know I'm not supposed to feel white guilt and it's not productive, but I do feel guilty. I do feel ashamed. I feel sad that I didn't do more sooner. I feel sad that I didn't learn more sooner. I feel sad that I didn't really see what I now am seeing more, right? And I especially heard that within the first few weeks of George Floyd's murder. And my fear is that that's somehow subsiding. And I mean, given that I'm the DEI field, right? And that clients call me and say, what can we do? What can we do? I see a sense of urgency in white people that I have never seen before. And that is in the company environment, which is good news, right? But I also do see what a lot of us see, which is, people not necessarily being willing to do their work. It's not enough. And we've all heard this. We've all seen these on the posts on social media. I'm sick of your outrage. I'm sick of your good wishes. I'm sick of my heart goes out to you. I want action, right? And so I can only tell you what some of the white people in my life are doing, and what I'm doing, taking this work very personally. And you actually recommended a couple of books a couple months ago, White Fragility and Me and White Supremacy. And it's kind of amazing. Like, I'm in a group of all white people talking about the book Me and White Supremacy every Saturday morning at 9. And every single week we talk 2 or 3 of the days because the book is separated into 20 days. And everyone in that group has shifted in so many, like in ways big and small. I mean, we come to tears on those calls. And we share our deepest truth. You know, it is a place where it's safe to feel whatever you feel and not feel like you're burdening a Black person with your feelings, right? Because you have feelings, you don't need ours on top of all that, right? But it is, I think, our responsibility, like the mental and emotional real estate that you just described has been taken up in your mind and heart, in family conversations and workplaces forever, is now also we're carrying some of that. And in a way, it's like, well, not just in a way. I think that's progress, you know? So
I think that's progress. And I think you raised something very important, which is, you know, I call this being at the gym in January versus being at the gym in July, right? So everybody after George Floyd or after some seminal event is leaning in. And then suddenly it sort of tapers off, like many things in life, right? And so, but to really develop the muscle and be strong enough to carry the weight of racism, frankly, on your own as white people, because this is a problem for white people. Black people and other people of color are the recipients of this, but the challenge is really a challenge for white people.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And actually,
right?
I'd love to ask you something, because so when I went to Black Lives Matter protests, which again, my first Black Lives Matter protest a few months ago, Andre Taylor, who's a Seattle guy, I don't know if you've ever heard him speak. He's incredibly inspirational. I mean, I had chills and tears just listening to him. And he spoke to white people very directly, and then he spoke to Black people very directly. What he said to white people was, it's your turn. It's your turn to fight racism as hard and as personally as we have been doing as Black people forever. It's your turn. And I mean, it was way longer than that, way more inspiring than I'm making up. It was pretty darn powerful because that was his message to white people. And I mean, he was like on the stage, like, white people, I have some homework for you, you know, and it was just awesome. I mean, I get chills just thinking about it now. And then he said, okay, Black people, I have some advice for you. I'm talking now to the Black people. Like, for you, it's an inside job. That was his language, right? Like, essentially the oppression that you face, the struggles that you face, the disadvantages, the racism that you face is systemic, and the white people need to deal with that shit, basically, the systemic stuff. Like, white people, you hear this, you see this, are you gonna work and fight? Black people, you're worthy, you gotta do the inside job, you gotta do your own work to like blossom within this system of oppression, essentially. And so I would love to know, because, and here's specifically why I'm asking this question, is because one of the things that has been hardest for me and most maddening for me to hear and address with my white people friends, mostly in the older category or really ultra conservative right wing category, you know, has been when people say, we're setting up an entire generation of Black people to just think they're victims, which just makes me so mad when I hear that, right? And I think that I hear too many white people wanting to make it all about either, it's not my fault, and like, look, some Black people are super successful. How do you explain that? And like, if we keep talking about racism, we're just setting these Black people up to think that they're, you know, just victims of oppression and that there's no hope, right? And I have so far combated that with, look, it's both our problem as white people to fight, to see and to fight and to build awareness and to do our own internal work. And nobody is saying that there isn't personal empowerment on the table too for every human being, right? So how do you, like, just speak to that if you would.
I don't want to paint every white person with a broad brush, and nor do I speak for all Black people. So let's be absolutely clear about that. But if that's the biggest problem, that I don't want to set people up to be victims, is if that's what's keeping you from doing the work, that's an excuse.
Yeah.
That can't be the thing that's keeping you from doing the work.
No.
That you would like to deflect and make that about other people. If that is how Black people saw themselves, we would not have been thriving. Every clapdown that we see about Black people thriving in this country is because they started to thrive.
Yeah.
Go back to Tulsa, 1936, 7, 8.
Yeah.
Go back there. When the community was thriving, people took it down. This is what happens. It's cyclical, it's predictable. We understand that. And so if you think that's what you're setting up, so imagine, here's what I'm going to tell you. If I see a person of color, if I see a woman, if I see somebody really thriving, really at the super, super, super top of their game, guarantee you I'm putting my money on that person. You know why? They had to jump every hurdle.
Yep.
They had to navigate a system that did not want them there. They had to show up in an entirely different way. Stronger, better, faster. Twice as far, work twice as hard, half as far. It's still true. My parents told me that when I was young. I'm telling my nieces that now in their youth too. It's still true. So honestly, that I just call BS on that.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you think you're setting people up as big, you know which cohort of women is graduating at a faster clip than any other? Black women.
Wow. Wow. That's
like, this is not a thing.
Well, and the people, so I've had
Victimhood.
a couple, like, especially conservative right-wing kind of folks in my life, or people that see me being super vocal and anti-racist on my social media channels and in things I'm writing, and I've definitely become more edgy and deliberate and just really vocal. I mean, more so than ever in my life. And so what I'm getting from, again, I don't want to paint this like in my life, I would say literally 90% of the white people I know are coming to a reckoning, and they're like, holy shit, I have to do more, I have to do better. Now, it's the 10% that is challenging, is the most challenging though, right? Because it's much easier to kind of get in that group with the 90% who agree with my beliefs, like, want to do their work. And I tend, of course, to like want to be around people like that. I don't spend a lot of time around folks who are just acting ignorant or racist, right?
Yeah.
But
I think one of the things that you're talking about
yeah,
is how do you address the 10%? The 10% of people who are outliers, who aren't really part of the 90%. And what I would tell you is we have never had, I can't think of a time when we ever had 90% agreement in this country on anything. We didn't have 90% agreement during civil rights. We didn't have that. So, but slowly but surely you see the country coming along.
I think so.
I'm not really spending my time, talent, and energy and mental space on the people that I feel furthest from.
That's right.
I'm not spending nor am I meeting people where they are.
Yeah.
I'm not here to meet you where you are. I don't understand what that means. I don't understand when people say, oh, we have to meet them where they are. Where's the middle ground between me and a racist?
Yeah.
What ground am I expected to give up to meet them where they are? I would rather work on the people who are malleable, who say, I know that I need to do. I may not know what I need to do, but I'm willing to shift and move and morph. And then you get other people coming in. You get the late adopters coming in, and then you get people who never will. That's
right.
Fine. Right? That's okay. I'm not trying to reach them.
Yeah.
My message is not for them.
Yeah, I always say about our business and who we serve, I preach to the converted. I do not have time to go in. There are enough people right now, which is a good place to be. Enough people who already believe, for instance, in the value around diversity, equity, and inclusion work, who know that it's like, so when our president comes out and says, like he did a few weeks ago, I'm banning all diversity trainings because they're anti-American. Thankfully, I mean, that has wide-reaching repercussions that we can't even get into here. I mean, crazy. I'm learning more and more about that. But there are a lot of people who are like, diversity training is the most American thing I can think of, actually. But that said, I remembered what I was going to say about the 10% over here. That I've received a couple of my most difficult moments in the last couple of months have been receiving videos that my white friends, white people in my life have sent me that were Black people essentially saying that message, like Trump found the 5 Black people who support him and put them all on stage.
Right.
I mean, my sort of cynical response is like, oh, interesting. Yeah. So you found 1 of 5 Black people who believes, that racism isn't really a thing.
Correct.
You know what I mean? But it's like that. It's so maddening to see a small slice of white people looking at things like Candace Owens' video that I think I emailed you one day about and said, oh my God, this is so hard to watch. I watched the whole thing
Right.
through the lens of like, oh my gosh, how, what, and wrote a very lengthy response back
Yes.
to the, about, well, interesting how she doesn't seem to mention anything about systemic racism or, redlining or, any of the actual facts around why the place that we are in today, socioeconomically, with race, everything. But
white people, when white people say that, I'm like, do white people who call themselves good white people, by the way, I've never known a Black person to actually use that word. I've only ever heard white people say the term good white people.
Yeah.
Never. So when good white people say that, I think, do you want to claim David Duke?
Right.
Do you want to claim every white person who has justifying and vilifying opinion? Do you want to claim them, and do you want to put them up as your poster person for white people? No. Right. Somehow Black people and other people of color are somehow one person speaks for all of us. I said earlier, I don't speak for all Black people. Candace Owens doesn't speak for me. I'm sure I don't speak for Candace Owens.
Right.
But we don't put them up and hold them up. We don't hold white people up in that same way.
Yeah.
Right? We just don't do it. We don't demand that of white people. We demand it, though, of other people of color. We demand that everybody be a monolith. Otherwise, we just spend our time. What white people sometimes do is spend their time pointing out all the holes over on the other side of the net rather than worrying about their side of the net. So if you're worried about that video with Candace Owens, go worry about David Duke and the Proud Boys, please.
Yeah, exactly.
You got plenty to do on your side of the net. You don't need to worry about this side of the net.
That's right. I mean, and that echoes the same message, that Andre Taylor said. It's like, you worry about your role in this, right? So it feels really wrong when white people who have so much work to do to combat racism and to shift the way we think, and white centering and tone policing and all of our work, we have so much to do, right? It feels so wrong to focus on bat it over the net at all the work that other person or people have to do. Yeah.
So, stay focused.
Yeah. So one of the things we have talked about too, and that has come up again and again, too, that women and that Black professionals, both men and women, receive less mentoring and less sponsorship throughout their careers. And that more fearfulness, more caution. I saw a data point that applied to women, but I bet and I've heard it just more anecdotally. I've heard it be said about people of color, that leaders are often more timid to mentor, coach, sponsor, or give direct feedback to people of color. And
sure,
disadvantage, because we all know that how you get anywhere above a certain level is partly your expertise and partly who you know and who goes to bat for you and who opens makes connections for you. And so yeah, tell me about that. For the mentors who are listening, because this is for mentors, right? For the mentors who are listening, I mean, what advice do we have about, do people of color need both people that can relate to their experience, for instance, as a Black woman or a Black man or another person of color, and white people to step up and be mentors and sponsors?
Yes, they need both. And white people need both, right? All of us need both and all. And so you're right about that data point. Women and people of color tend not to get as honest feedback because people's assumed fears, they assume a risk there of saying, oh gosh, Amelia, you need to work on this, or I'd really love to see you take this opportunity or that opportunity. There's a fear there. I think it's multifaceted. I don't think it's just one reason, but I think there are times like, oh, well, if I'm coaching this woman and I say something, well, I don't know if she's going to think it's sexist, or I don't know if she's going to think. In part, it's a fear of learning how to deliver actionable feedback. Women tend to get more feedback that's about personality, that's about how they show up versus real, or the blanket, this person's not strategic. If I hear that one more time in my career about people, I think I'm just going to actually scream.
Me too.
This blanket catch-all that means nothing but means everything.
That's right.
right? So we are sometimes afraid to learn how to think, coach, and deliver feedback differently
Yep.
because it requires more of us as the mentor. And I would suggest that we have to be able to do that. We have to be able to look at the person holistically as we mentor, not just, I know how to have a conversation with this person because they're like me, they'll get it. We have
Yeah.
a shorthand and a shortcut. No, you actually have to learn to do it in a way that will serve people for what they need. Because if the point is mentoring the person, then you do things that help the person. If the point is for you to show up and look like a big shot, then you'll do things that show up and make you look like a big shot. Like, you have to understand why you're delivering the message, because your job and your goal is to make sure the message is received, not that you deliver the message.
Yeah.
So I think people of color and women need both. I
Yeah.
think everybody needs both. You do sometimes. I had a coach once who was a white woman, and she was great, but she did have a blind spot about what it means to show up as a person of color, as a leader in an organization. And we knew that, and we addressed that up front, right?
Yeah.
She learned through the conversation and through coaching me as well. And I think right, but we called it out in the beginning. You're going to have a blind spot here, and I have other people I'm going to go to about that. Until you learn how to do that, you don't yet know that.
Yeah.
That too is okay. So both, but we've got to stop being afraid to say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing. Yes, you're probably going to say something that's not going to be okay. Yes.
That's right. Like I did earlier, like you corrected me. And it's like it takes a certain amount of giving yourself permission to be imperfect, giving yourself permission to slip up, giving yourself permission to not know everything. Right.
Mhm.
Like I would imagine that for a mentor, and I mean, I've actually been on the other side of that equation. I was a white woman coaching a black woman who was at a high tech company, who'd been 25 years an executive at another company entirely. She moved over to this tech company and I was her coach. And it was the first black woman that I coached. And this was maybe, I don't know, 12-ish years ago, I want to say. And one of the things we talked about in the coaching, she moved from a pretty formal environment on the East Coast
Mm,
into a much more casual tech,
mm,
Valley, Northwest environment here in Seattle, where I live. And one of the things that she didn't feel like she was connecting, and I knew this culture pretty well from the outside in. I hadn't worked there, but I coached a lot of people in it. And one of the things I'd said to her is, you come across super polished, really like articulate. You got every T crossed, every I dotted. People dress more casually than you do. They speak more casually than you do. And we had a moment in coaching where she was like, I don't know if you get it. I don't know if you get that, like, white people can be more casual. They can use more like slang. They can just be more casual and get away with
mhm,
it. Like she said to me something like, Mitch, I want you to imagine that if I dressed the way that most of the people at this company dress, or that if I spoke as casually and as sort of flippantly as many of the people in this company speak, would I still have garner the same level of respect? And I just had this moment, like to your point, I get chills at my spine just thinking about this, right? Because
mhm,
as much as I coached and taught her some things, she taught me so much about when we recently reconnected. And I said, you helped me. You said I do the inside
mhm,
loud. She helped me do that because we had so many open conversations where I had to just like stop and think and be like, wow, there's a lot here that I don't know. And so I think with any mentor coaching anyone who's significantly different than you around race, around age, around gender, around company background, anything, it's like as much as you go into a mentor relationship thinking I want to teach, I want this person to get so much
mhm,
value, I want them to learn from me. It's also how might this person's challenges, complaints, or opportunities be different based on their life and lived experience? You
mhm.
know, how can I not just write it off as you know, like it would have been so destructive had I said to her, "Oh no, no, that's all just in your head."
Right.
Like, no, it's not.
No. It's
Yeah,
the way and you're absolutely right, because even as you're using that example, I was like, well, she doesn't have the luxury to do that. She doesn't have the luxury to talk down or dress down. People will assume she's uneducated. People
right.
assume she doesn't know what she's talking about. She will go into a meeting if she's dressed very casually. I mean, imagine we're back in real meetings, but she might go into a meeting and people might assume she's quote, the help and not a professional, not, the professional in the room with using her thought leadership. So all of those things are going to happen anyway, but you don't have a luxury always to do that. You have to have so much credibility in the business in order, and you said she was new in her organization, in order to show up that way. That's a lot of credibility you have to earn in an organization to be able to do that. But it's the same thing we say to moms, right? Oh, you just need to go on that trip and you need to take those things. And the mom is thinking, I got babies at home. I might be breastfeeding. I might be doing whatever. Like, I don't have the luxury of doing these things. So you're right. As you build a roadmap for someone, it's important to think, how might you get here? Let's talk about outcomes as a mentor, where you're trying to go, and let's build the roadmap together.
That's right.
I might help you build it, and then we might stop and say, okay, what things here feel like they're accessible to you and which things don't? And let's talk about why, to open that conversation for the mentee to say, gosh, you know what? I'm considering having another baby and I'm not sure that I'll be able to do X, Y, or Z in that confidential, bubble with you, to really have that open dialogue with you as their mentor. That's really important to have the space, rather than just building a roadmap because you went on that road and be like, here you go.
That's right. It's so true, because everyone has their own. I always think about it as if we could actually physically see all of the bubbles of thoughts, challenges, complexities that are in any given situation. Like, you're giving me advice as my mentor, say, and over here I'm thinking like you did, well, I can't do that because work because like bubble. It's like a good mentor, like, pops those bubbles, goes in with open questions like the one you just said, like, where do you want to go? Okay, like, how, what's your timeline? Oh wow, that seems kind of long. Like, why so long? Oh, because I have this plan or that plan, right? It's like being a great listener and realizing that people don't operate the exact same way that you do is probably one of the best skills in any mentor could.
I think that's right. And you can help the person to your point, to pop those bubbles that may be assumptions that they're making that may not be, really true. I say often, sometimes people get information and they make a story.
Yeah.
When sometimes it's just information. There's not a story, it's just information. And so a good mentor can help you frame the right story, use the right information to frame the right story. But I think across, to your earlier point, I think across race and gender is good for all of us, because we all need each other to be successful. None of our companies can run with just one type of talent or one type of person in an organization. We say we need diversity. We say we need diversity of thought. We say we need diversity of background. And then we end up going to the same thing.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Or we get diversity of thought, diversity of race, diversity of gender, diversity of background. We start to slowly make progress. I see this with companies we work with. And it's so frustrating to really see. I got this moment, this sort of aha recently, working with a client, where I was like, they're paying a lot of attention to the beginning of the career life cycle for their people of color, and a whole lot of attention at the end when they leave. Like, they're doing exit interviews and they're wondering, why did you go? And they're over here asking questions. How do we get more Black people? How do we get more women? How do we get more of this demographic or that demographic, right? But then in the middle, it's like they lose sight of the fact that, well, what are those employees' experiences while they're working there? Are you measuring the degree to which they feel a sense of belonging, the degree to which they feel like they're in the right role, being unleashed, that their talents are valued, that they're being heard? Are they assessing this environment as fair? How are we asking, once they're in, what their experience is like?
I call this the ice cream problem.
Oh, really? You have a name for this?
I have a name for this. It's called the ice cream problem. So a lot of people pay attention up front. And when you come in, they're like, oh my gosh, as a diversity practitioner, people are like, oh my gosh, I need lots of diversity. And what they're saying is, I need 31 flavors of ice cream right now. So that is fantastic. Do you have a freezer?
Yes.
Because if you don't have a freezer and the ice cream melts, you don't get to blame the ice cream.
No.
You have to blame yourself. Imagine coming home after a day and you're like, can you believe that ice cream did not eat in the freezer all by itself? Can you it melted? Look at the ice cream just on the counter melting. Like, I don't even know how this sounds, but that is what people do. They instantly want 31 flavors of ice cream. They get the ice cream. The ice cream melts.
Yep.
And they go, well, we tried having ice cream once and it melted, so we'll never try ice cream again.
Oh my gosh, this is the perfect analogy. This is the perfect analogy. It really
Like,
is. Can I use that? I'll give you credit every time.
please,
Okay, every
I
time.
encourage it. If you ever
called it the ice cream problem.
The problem of the ice cream.
I'm a huge fan of quotes and analogies because you can say so much with so little, right?
And it goes so many places. It's like, here's what you probably need. You probably need an ice cream cone.
Yeah.
You need something you can handle while we go build a freezer. So we have to focus on our culture because people think the problem of diversity is the pipeline. I just need to hire more. And I'm telling you, the problem is not always the pipeline. The problem is the freezer.
That's right. That's right. And like, if you think about, I heard a really powerful story the other day that just, what's the word, like magnifies your point here, which is that, you know, I was talking to a Black woman who works in a law firm, and she did work in a law firm. And she said that as the one Black female attorney, they would often pull her in with no additional compensation, not even really a thank you, into interview loops with other people of color to prove that the company has diversity. And then she said, you know, it got so old, and the company experience, because they didn't have a freezer, to use your analogy, the company experience for her was so messed up and not great, and for her, that she said it depended on the day, but sometimes I would literally look right across the desk at the candidate and be like, don't work here. It's horrible. You do not want to be here. Right? So it's like, because it was like the ice cream was melting, right?
The ice cream is melting. First of all, sounds fantastic. And I can already hear somebody's thought out there that's listening to this going, but we're supposed to have diverse loops. We're supposed to have diverse loops for interviews. You're not supposed to tap the same person over and over again. Just trot out your brown people or your women and dust them off and put them in interview loops with no context and no reason that they're there other than the fact that they're a person of color. When you have more diversity in your organization, your loops become more diverse because, right? It's like a virtuous cycle. Remember virtuous cycles? It becomes a virtuous cycle. So absolutely 100%. But I think what people don't know, I think what men, and maybe white men specifically, don't know is when you are in the interview loop, questions do come up from candidates about what it's like to be a woman in the organization, or what it's like to be a person of color, or what it's like to be a queer person in this organization, or whatever it is. Those questions come up. And I think other people don't know that happens.
Right.
That a woman will wait for another woman in her interview loop and then lean in and say, tell me what it's like.
Yep.
Your woman, Mitch, in this organization, what's your experience been? That absolutely is going to happen on that loop.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's like, I sometimes wish, like my wish is that people could put on the Harry Potter invisibility cloak and just hear some of the conversations that are had without them in the room, like the one you're talking about. Like, what does the woman say when the woman in the interview loop says, what's it like to be a woman here? How do you feel valued? Do you see opportunity for yourself? Or the person of color asks that question. It's like, oh man, you better have a real good idea of what those people are going to be saying. And not just so you can get that talented person hired, but so that your company's a genuinely good place to be for not just a check the box kind of place. Good place to be.
Because you'll check the box on the one end and it's someone else is going out right the other end, right? It doesn't.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's the problem of the ice cream.
So I'd say we wrap this with like one question, which is like a really specific question for mentors, which is, are there ways that either of us think mentors need to adapt their mentoring style approach in order to be an effective mentor? And let's answer this in two ways. Like, in order to be an effective mentor for a woman, in order to be an effective mentor for a person of color, are there differences in the way that you mentor someone?
I would say first, know that you have blind spots and acknowledge them. It is okay to say, gosh, I'm not sure how your trajectory, if you want it to be over 3, 4, 5 years, really works. I've never done that before. Let's bring Mitch into this conversation or bring someone else into the mentoring conversation. I think that is perfectly appropriate. And I think if you're going to mentor someone different than you, then there's an onus there to learn something, to read things, to have experiences that help you understand their experience.
Yeah.
What's that like? Like, oh, I'm going to be mentoring, a Black person. Well, gosh, I don't really have that many Black people in my circle. What can I read, know, do so that I understand a little bit? I can approach it a little bit in an educated way, this conversation and some challenges or some opportunities that we might have in this mentorship relationship.
That is such perfect advice, Amelia, because you also taught me actually that same thing, which is don't put the responsibility on the shoulders of the Black person in your life or multiple Black people in your life to teach you about racism, to teach you everything there is to know about their experience in racism. I was even a little timid, quite frankly, to reach out to Black people in my network and say, would you be willing to spend 30 minutes with me? Because I really was super clear to say, only if you want to, like, I'm, this is where this work will go. This is why I want to do it. You just let me know. Because I felt a little timid because you taught me that you got to do your work first. Don't go ask you or someone else, what are the 5 things I should know, or what should I do? What should I do? It's like, at least tap all the resources you can find on this little phone
Right.
I mean, like one Google search on like,
yes, show me you're willing.
Show you're willing.
If I'm willing to help, but I'm not willing to do all of your work.
That's right.
I'm willing to help. I'm willing to engage in the conversation. But if you want to understand what it's like to be a Black professional in 30 minutes at a virtual coffee right now, I've been doing this a long time. We are not going to nail that in 30 minutes in a coffee conversation, just so you can sound woke when you talk to your other white friends and you can say, oh, I talked to a Black person. I totally get it.
Right.
Totally understand. No, it's going to take more than that to really understand. There's a start though. And so I do encourage people, start where you are.
Yeah.
Please start where you are. There's some quote that I'm going to get wrong, which is, the best time to plant an oak tree was 20 years ago and the next best time is today.
Yes. I don't think you did get it wrong. I think that's exactly the quote. It's
right.
Such fun. We have to give ourselves permission to be able to start anywhere. Mm-hmm. Right? Because
start where you are.
I mean, you can't go back and start 10 years ago if you didn't already, right? Mm-hmm. One of the things I would say on this is that there's this, so Whirl, the online summit for women that we put on years ago, we had a speaker for that summit. Her name was Susan Polantuano, total mouthful, right? Polantuano. And she has a TED Talk that's phenomenal. It's called The Missing 33%. Mm-hmm. And in it, she did all this research about how women tend to be mentored around a different set of things. You alluded to that earlier, that they tend to be mentored around a different set of things. But in her research, there were like 3 categories of things people are mentored on. One was, I think, leadership acumen. One was personal greatness. And one was business acumen. Mm-hmm. And women were being talked to quite a bit around team skills, emotional intelligence, how to navigate work-life balance, how to handle interpersonal issues, everything around personal greatness and like how to get along in a team and some strategies around leadership, and very little around the actual P&L, strategy of the business, finances, all of that. And men were just more naturally being coached and mentored around all 3 of those things. And so she really was able to highlight that and say, to mentor, I've brought that into every mentoring program I've ever done since, to say, hey, pay attention. Like, whether you have a mentee or the mentor, pay attention to the percentage of time that you are spending talking about various things. And if you notice yourself kind of going towards that, all about one thing, I think the question too, like if you're mentoring a person of color, question I've been trying to just get really habitual at asking is, would I be having this same conversation, or would I be feeling the same way if this person was white? Mm-hmm. Right? Or would I be feeling the same way, or would I be having a similar or different conversation if this person was male? Right? And if the answer comes back yes, what's that about?
Yeah. Well, and I think to that point, we also know that men are typically hired. There's data around this that men are typically hired based on potential,
Yes.
and women and people of color are based on what they've accomplished.
Yes. Yes, that
So,
has a name. That has a name. A woman, I forget the book she wrote, but it has a name. It's called the Prove It Again syndrome. And that it's the prove it again syndrome. It's that exactly we bet on men. Like I was sharing that very statistic. Once I learned it had a name. I love it when I learn that something has a name.
yes.
It has a name. It has a name. In fact, you can even do a search on prove it again syndrome, and I think you'll even find like a 2 or 3 minute video on it. It's really good. I think Lena put it out. But in this prove it again syndrome, the promotion decisions around men tend to sound a little something. Not all men, of course. I'm generalizing, but the data proves that it's like, well, he hasn't done da da da, or he hasn't been in this role that long, or he hasn't actually been in this exact type of role. But you know what? I think he's got it. I think he's got it. I think we should bet on this guy. I mean, I think he's blah blah blah. I think he's my guess. He's the right person for the job. He's
yes,
then
that good.
Sounds with her, a person of color, a woman, is that it's like, well, I think she just needs 6 more months in that role. I think we have to wait until we see her. I know she did that at that company, but she hasn't done it at this company yet. Which, by the way, that Black client that I was speaking about earlier, my very first Black female client 10 years ago, that was one of the things she told me. She's like, you know what happens? Everybody keeps telling, they didn't even hire her into this tech company as a leader. They were like, well, I know that you've been a leader there for 25 years, but you haven't been a leader here, and we have a really unique culture. Meanwhile, she sees like men coming in.
And you know what? Spoiler alert, it's not that unique.
Right? I know.
Spoiler alert, your culture is not that unique. It's not.
So it's like we make women and people of color prove it again and again and again. And then what happens is it's so unfair. And we wonder, like one of the things I like to talk about is how also I think good mentors, anger has got to be part of this process. Like I sometimes get so pissed off. I don't know about you, but I sometimes get so pissed off when I learn about these data points, and especially when I'm not just learning about them intellectually, but when I'm actually experiencing them. And having coached many women, white women and women of color, but mostly white women, to be honest, I've heard this story again and again and again, which is, I was told that these next 3 things, as soon as I prove that, then I'm there, I'm here, I'm there. Nope. And then I see my peer who I don't really understand. Why is he moving up faster? Why is he getting these hookups? Why, right? And it's just maddening. So I also think a good mentor, especially like a white male mentor, needs to be comfortable with being uncomfortable with anger. Because I think anger is one of those things that comes with progress, that, the release valve, when someone starts to really trust you, they might show their anger. And when they show their anger, it doesn't mean they're flying off the handle. It doesn't mean they're mentally ill. It doesn't mean they're crazy.
It doesn't mean they're emotional because they're a woman. It doesn't mean she's an angry Black woman. It doesn't mean that. It means I think I have a safe space with which to put that and work through it.
That's right. That's right. Because if you don't let it out, it stays in and it implodes, right? Or we only talk about it with the people who can't really change anything. The people, the people in our lives, our besties, or our family, right?
Yeah.
So
I totally agree.
I know we need to call it. And Amelia, the funny thing is you and I are the ones that have the meeting next.
I know. That's what I was thinking about. I'm like, you and I are in a meeting now. So I felt fine to go over because we're already together.
But exactly. That was exactly the thought process I went through.
I always enjoy talking with you. I always come up with so many new ways of thinking and processing. And honestly, I hope lots of people are having this kind of conversation. I hope everybody has somebody that they can have this level of trust and conversation with, and the ability to, I heard an author say it this way, and I'm going to get it wrong, but she said, people need to have more conversations without a destination in order to really get to know one another and to really sort of know what it takes. Like many times we're working on a project and we're having a conversation with a destination, the end of this project. But in order to really move us forward as a society, we need to have more conversations that just roam and wherever they go. And and end up with different thoughts and ideas and actions that we can take as humans. And she was saying this in response to, I think it was a 2014 or 2015 study that says 75% of white people don't have any person that's a person of color in their sphere. In life. And she was saying, it's one thing to say like, oh, I work with this person who is, Latina, but it's a different thing to say, I have a friend. I have someone with whom I have trust, with whom I can disagree, with whom I can call out, and who'll call me out, and really deepen the relationship and the dialogue as well. So I'm always happy to have that conversation with you.
Well, and by the way, I just have to say on that note, I mean, we have a couple friends in our life who are very good friends, who, we are doing things with them socially on weekends and having dinner, etc. And do you know that until George Floyd's murder, we've had about 3 conversations about race? Well, probably more than that. I wrote this article, I don't know, a year ago about white privilege, and that opened doors, because then my Black friends, I think, probably just felt more able. I noticed a real opening actually, where they would just be more sarcastic or show a little anger or cynicism on certain things, and I was like, oh my gosh, they trust me more. I mean, I could just I could just feel it, but anyway, so I think we talked earlier about what are white people saying? What are Black people saying? There's almost an assumption within that question that it's only white people hanging with white people and Black people hanging with Black people. And what I've also noticed through this time is that we're having more conversations across race, across gender. And for me, I've been also challenging myself to have conversations across political spectrums, because that one's been especially hard. But I agree with you. I mean, just having wandering conversations, it's so fun. I mean, you and I have planned times to talk, and we go on for an hour and a half. And I've just learned so much from you and just have so much fun. We have so much fun talking about
I know. It's good. Even though the topics are sometimes heady.
They're heady, but someday we just need to go out, have a glass of wine, and just talk about, I don't know, nail polish in Africa.
I was going to say, we both love Africa. I'm not kidding. Like, I would love to have the luxury, it seems, to have a conversation just about, like, I don't know, pop culture or nail polish or whatever.
Polish advice. Look at your nails. Right. Anyway.
Yeah, they're only Zoom ready though. They're not professionally ready. They're only Zoom ready because I do them myself now. Haven't been to a salon. So, and thank you, my friend, for engaging in the conversation.
Thanks, Amelia. I appreciate you so much.